Welcome back to the Up in the Blue Seats podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Harts. The Rangers are still in first place despite a loss last night, but don't worry, everything is fine. 7-3 in their last 10 over this rough road trip, road stretch, road games. We're all a mess here. Mollie's joining us from Ottawa still. Hey, Molly, how we doing? Good to see you. Brian's in New Jersey, somewhere in the swamps of Jersey, as Bruce Springsteen once sang. We're all here just discussing the first place Rangers, still first in the Metro, first in the East, first in the league. We got a couple teams tied up there now, but it's still okay. Everything is easy peasy. It's fine. The stretch of games is over. We got a few days off before they come back. And, we got to go to Washington, got to go home and face the Kings and Leafs. But let's do some recapping here, folks. 7-3 in that last stretch, like I mentioned, but they took a loss last night in Ottawa, 6-2. Looked a little lethargic. They look like they're just a little tired. And I mean, that's to be expected. They've been playing a ton of games back and forth, some hard fought games. Brian, let me go to you first here. What did you see last night in Ottawa? Goaltending a little slow, guys little played on the heels a little bit. It was just one of those games where just playing a lot of games, finally catching up to this Ranger team.
Yeah, I think, it's interesting with how they're playing this year in terms of the structure and how much success it's given them. And then playing highly talented teams that lack that structure, it seems like it's causing them problems. And that doesn't really worry me if I'm a Rangers fan as much. Now, you want to beat the teams that are below you, but right now everybody's below them, so you can't win every game. I've been through that a little bit when you really are working at your structure and making sure like you're playing against a team that should be in the right spots and they're kind of not. They kind of go rogue a little bit. I think that is sort of a problem for them right now. It's hard. They're still trying to, perfect this sort of system, and going to Ottawa sometimes is you got to manufacture your own energy, right? It's not, you're not getting jacked up to play Ottawa, who's not necessarily a powerhouse right now. Everyone expects them to be better. They still have good players, but you go in there, and if you're not, clicking on all cylinders, so to speak, where you're mentally engaged, you're physically engaged, and your structure's on point, it's really hard to win against anybody. And I think that's, I did see some things that I liked, but yeah, they get a couple deflection goals, a weird, like almost a broken stick bounce from the point that went, right on the tape for another goal against. It's just, you chalk it up and just say, and move on.
Yeah, I think that the biggest concern for me coming out of the last few games is the odd man rushes against, which is something that, they've all talked about, they've all acknowledged as an area that they need to get better. But obviously they've let in a few more goals than they probably would have liked in the last few games. But I mean, like Brian said, I think Forsberg played an unbelievable game. Brady Tkachuk is so good. I think it was just a very on night for Ottawa and a bit of an off night for the Rangers all around. But like Jacob Trouba said, which I had to double check to make sure that he actually said it, he was like, nobody's dog's dead. I was like, he's like, we just lost the game. Nobody's dog's dead. I was like, oh, all right, just making sure that's what you said.
That honestly feels like a perfect way of putting it, because
Yeah.
I mean, look, a lot of Ranger fans are enjoying this high, enjoying the season. I feel like expectations have been beyond met from where we kind of started the year, especially coming off of the disappointing series with the Devils to end the season last year. But yeah, no big dog died. But the thing that does kind of concern me a little bit, if there is some sort of concern that I could throw out there, is the lack of defense-ish, the little slow goaltending play. I believe the last three or four games, I think they've given up at least 4 to 5 goals, which you really didn't see much early on, and you kind of gotten spoiled by the way Quickies play, by the way Igor started the season. Again, do we just think that this is them, needing a break, needing just to take it easy a little bit, or is it something that Lobs and the coaching staff have to work with in terms of their defensive skills back there?
I think it's just the how are you giving teams their chances? If it's for free, if it's forcing a pass, if it's forcing a play, it's easily correctable. I think that's by and large what they have to understand. And look, you take a game like this and you learn from it. Like, this is a highly skilled team we're playing against, who's, a crap team. They're down the bottom, and for a reason. They're kind of riverboat gamblers. So it's either they're going to get their chances and they're going to work and score and they're going to win, or like in most cases, it's not going to quite work because they play a risky game. And when you're playing against that, that's a great opportunity to learn. Say if you're in a playoff series and you're up a couple goals in the game, teams start risking it with high talent. All right, we know what happens when they do this. Let's be patient. Let's stay back. It's just a learning lesson. It's another dress rehearsal. There's 82 dress rehearsals before the playoffs. And that's, you learn a little bit about your team, win or loss, every single game. And that's how they have to approach, the film after this game and on to the next one.
That's a good line, Brian. I might steal that from you and write
Go
it.
ahead. I stole it from Matt Carl.
Okay, maybe I'll give him credit then. But yeah, every time that we've mentioned certain areas that, came up in the game, especially after the Senators game last night, defensive structure, odd man rushes, even in prior games, Laviolette consistently says these are all teachable things, fixable things. So I agree with Brian's point. I think that, the coaching staff is identifying what needs to be tightened up, and it's all fixable things, not any sort of lingering trait or anything like that, which is good, I guess.
They don't have to go and get 3 new defensemen and 2 new, we've seen it work. So that's a good thing. It's there. You have the personnel to do it. It's just hard to do every single night for a full game.
And it's a good thing that they've built up this lead and this, they're well success early on this year where we can kind of make those mistakes early on and do a little correction there.
And they've bounced back after every loss.
They have. They still haven't lost back-to-back games,
no,
knock on wood, which is impressive, which I forget which Twitter account I follow, one or X, whatever.
No, it's Twitter.
It's Twitter. One of the Twitter Ranger fan accounts I follow, and it was something like, this Ranger team goes down 2-0 in a game to start just because they want to feel something. And I'm like, you know what? Listen, I if that's the mentality, hell yeah, do it. I mean, because
Brian is like, I am surrounded by idiots.
No, but if anything, it makes me as a fan watching the game, it goes, because a 2-0 lead, early on, it can put you down, man. It can really knock you out. But with this Ranger team, and mind you, it's only been a few months so far, but it doesn't feel like they're ever out of it. Even last night, you're down 2-0 and you come back, and then you go down again 3-1, and then you come back 3-2. It just feels like that's a good identity for a team that you want to see early on, because it never takes the fans out of it. It never takes at least the players out of it, I'd imagine too, right, Brian? Where if you guys know you can continually come back, you never want to put yourself, down in a hole like that. But if you have that mentality that you can keep coming back, that has to be a good thing, right?
Yeah, that's just a belief within the group. And usually the first intermission, say if you're down, you understand you could turn it on, or you believe. And a lot of what separates teams in the league aren't the players, is not the talent level. It's certainly the structure and how they're deployed, but definitely the belief in the room and the confidence factor, which can be a fleeting thing. But right now it looks like if they take a half a step back, they really pull it back in and work together to come back with a great performance. They just have so much talent, and I think they're all slotted where they're supposed to be. So it's they should be. I mean, Rangers fans should be happy.
After the first period in the Nashville game too, Laviolette apparently, quote unquote, gave them the business and really snapped them out of it. As soon as I was writing about that, I was thinking, I want to ask Brian if he's ever been in the room for one of those give the business talks, and I'd like to hear about that.
Man.
What is the business, Brian? Tell me.
I played a long time. It happened a lot to the team and to me individually. What's funny is, so Torts would get really on edge for him in Tampa when we go down to Tampa. And I wonder if a little bit has to do with the fact that Lavi spent a long time in Nashville playing against the team you coached. That's a big night for the head coach. And you realize that fairly quickly. I did anyway, when we went down to Tampa with Torts. And he was obviously very emotional and always, but when we got down there, it was another level of that where you're looking behind you sometimes on the bench, like, what is going on with this guy right now? He wanted to win so bad. And that's so the margin for error as a player is now shrunk in those games, and he is dialed in. So you better be ready. And then when he gives it to you, you're like, okay, all right, time to get it going, boys.
Well, listen, Laviolette has delivered the business, and it's worked. Put it that way. I feel like there's times where we hear about closed door meetings, and especially in other sports too, where closed door meetings happen and then there's no response. So at least when it has happened with the Rangers, they'll come back and give it to you. We've got Larry Brooks joining us in a few minutes, but we do have some Post Sports Plus subtext questions. So be sure to subscribe to Post Sports Plus if you want to get in on the next round, and you get all the exclusive scoops from Mollie, which is good stuff, including an article about why the Rangers haven't dipped into their prospect pool yet, which it's tempting, but you got to sign up to read that article. Let's start at the top here, Mal. From Marvin A. Azrak, we'll go with that. What's been your favorite city to visit so far this season? Let's go with you, Molly, and then Brian, I'm curious to hear about your favorite to visit when you were a player.
I've answered this a couple times. I always like to give my top three. I would say Montreal, Vancouver, and Tampa are my favorites. I spent a lot of time in Tampa over the last 4 years or so I think I'm a little biased because of that. But I mean, who wouldn't like going to Florida for an extended period of time?
Especially during the winter, yeah.
Those, same.
Really?
All three?
Yeah, they were the best. I mean,
wow.
yeah.
I'm honored.
Well, Tampa was great because the weather was nice and there was kind of stuff to do around, and then I played there and I loved it. But Fort Lauderdale was great, but you realize you can't sit out in the sun at the beach. Torch would be on his balcony looking at us, yelling at us.
Really?
Yeah. Nashville was a time. If you had a couple days, that was awesome.
Yeah.
The warm weather places were great. Arizona was always fun. We'd stay out in Scottsdale at the golf resort. But Van is awesome. Montreal is awesome any time of year.
Yeah. Bell Center, I feel like, is the best place in the NHL to take a game. Just because it doesn't matter what state of the team is in, whether they're good or bad, end of the season, beginning of the season, they show up in numbers. They're loud. It's fun. It's just very, I don't know. I always feel like I'm walking through history when I walk through that area.
It really is awesome. It's fantastic to see. I've been up there once when I was out injured and walked around like the top upper, whatever, up way up in the press box area and just looking down and seeing all these people coming. And Montreal was not good.
Yeah.
And the people were there and the kids were there loving watching their Habs. It really is cool to go in there. And then I played a couple playoff series there too, which is just out of control. Yeah. And Van was when Luongo was there and Kessler was there and the Sedins were there. That place was crazy too. It was really an awesome experience. All those rinks in Canada when you get on the ice and play are top notch. Calgary it's a funky building, and you get scored on, the flames go off and burn your eyebrows off. But in terms of going somewhere, if you have some time, maybe a day and a half or 2 days, the warm weather's nice in the middle of the winter. Your skin gets so dry.
Yeah.
All year long, you're putting your gear on, you shower 4 times a day. So you get out there, you throw a little lotion on, some vitamin D. It's nice.
As long as
recharge.
As long as John Tortorella isn't yelling at you from the balcony, that sounds lovely.
Yeah, he'll take the verbal beating sometimes.
Let's go to this one here. This is from Don Benson and Larry Weiss. What are the chances that Brodzinski can stick with Mika Kreidz? He seems so much better suited to play with them versus, I guess, Wheeler or Kakko, especially at his pace of play. We'll go with you, Brian, first in this one.
Okay, so if it's working like it is, and Jonny Brodzinski's a fast, tenacious player, you look at like a poor man Zach Hyman, who's a fast, tenacious player, and there were years in Toronto where people wouldn't understand why they wouldn't load up Matthews, Marner, and Nylander. This is 3, 4, 5 years ago. And it was because we could make two lines because this guy goes in, does the dirty work, gets them the puck back, doesn't care about goals for himself, is just going to play the game. And what you might have given up in terms of playmaking and high end hockey offense, you've spread it out to two lines. You've given these guys an opportunity to have the puck and create because this workhorse is going to get the puck for you. And I think it's a great compliment. So it's a guy who's bounced around and hasn't really got the deal he wanted in the offseason, has been effective as a player. So you give him a little bit more leash, see what he does with it. If he makes you look like a genius, you got a bargain on your first line.
Yeah, I think it depends on a lot of different things, but I do think that, I mean, just listening to the way Brodzinski talked about the fact that he feels like this is the first time an NHL coaching staff has actually trusted him and put him in a position to succeed. I imagine that just from my conversations with Jonny Brodzinski and knowing him as a player and as a person, I don't see him letting this opportunity pass him by. And it has arguably been probably the best fit out of the three candidates that the Rangers have had there. That being said, depending on how it goes, depending on when Capo Caco gets back, how they're feeling at that point in the season, if they want to give him another chance at the top line there, I do expect them to address it at the trade deadline. And I also wouldn't be surprised if we saw Jimmy Vesey up there at one point, depending on how things go. But I do think that when you look at the lineup, Vesey being in the bottom six in any capacity just makes them a much longer lineup because he brings so much skill down there and some secondary scoring. But I do think that that the ball is in Brodzinski's court. I think Brodzinski could really do something with this opportunity. It's a big time opportunity for him. And I think he's just such a really easy guy to root for. He is.
He is, and it's great to see, especially when it's someone succeeding on a top line like that.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to do one more before we hop over to Larry here. And this one comes from Andrew in Queens. Hi, Andrew from Queens. Brian, as a former Ranger, why do so many former Rangers always score on the Rangers? I mean, we had Anthony Duclair, we had Tarasenko. You actually scored against us when you left us. Well, why? Why?
Well, remember what I said about Torts and Lavi, and you go to a different place and you come back to that place that meant so much to you, right? I played against former teams a lot, but when I played against LA, when I played against the Rangers, it was something different. I was drafted by LA. I was with the organization for a while. I didn't play a ton of games, but I knew everybody in the organization. And as soon as I got to play them, I scored my first goal as a Ranger against LA. And I got 4 goals that year. So they were probably like, of course he scored against us.
See?
I feel like that is a question that every fan base has. I used to do it when I was a Bruins fan because I would see these guys come back and it's like, why did we trade him? He always scores against us. It's, I don't know. It's because I didn't feel comfortable playing against the Rangers, especially early on after the 5 years I played there. And then so when I would get a goal, I got a goal. I think I was in Florida. I might have had one with Tampa before that, but I don't even know. Like played a lot of games before I think I got one, and it was a great feeling. It really is. It was in the Garden, and it was to tie the game. And I had gotten a penalty after the second period, and the Rangers weren't very good at the time. So I remember that goal, and I'll always remember that goal because it was against the Rangers in the Garden, and those are big goals for any guy. But if you played there for a while, it means a little bit more. So, like converse to what I said, like the exact opposite of what I said about going into Ottawa against a team that's not very good in the standings and it's earlier in the year. You have to manufacture your emotions. Like you got to try to calm yourself down when you go into the Garden and play against your former team.
Yeah, so, Tarasenko scoring was, you could have taken that to the bank.
Yeah, it was a snipe though.
Oh my God. It was.
That was an
it really was.
Bomb.
It was gorgeous. It really was. It was on a tough angle too.
That's what that guy does.
Yeah.
Oh, trust me. I watched it all last season. At least the second half of the season. It was so fun to watch. He's it's a shame that it couldn't work out again. But oh well.
that's a guy we kept hearing about. Oh, is Kane coming back? But Tarasenko was the sneaky one that I low-key wanted to come back. Well, we're going to welcome back here Larry Brooks after this break, and we're going to get to a couple more of your questions. So stay tuned for that right here on Up in the Blue Seats. Back on the podcast here, and of course, we're joined by the great Larry Brooks. Larry, always appreciate you coming on with us here. To kind of recap where we've been in the podcast so far, we're talking about this, the 7-3 stretch on these back-to-back games. I guess one of the things I'm curious about to get your take on is what have you learned from this team during this 10-game and 18-day stretch that you may not have known before we got here?
Well, it's been an unusual schedule. I think that's first. It's not unfair. And the schedule will never be unfair to the Rangers, Islanders, Devils, Flyers. When you consider what Colorado does and Calgary does and Seattle does, these teams never have cause for complaint. But it's been kind of an unusual schedule for the Rangers this year. There's been, it seems to me, more one-offs on the road. They're on the road, they come back for a game, then they go right back again. I feel like they haven't really hit solid ground yet on the schedule. While they're obviously have played very well, I just don't think they've settled yet. And I think maybe the next couple of days will give them an opportunity to settle. They're not going to Washington. They play on Saturday, so they have a couple of days where they're able to work on Thursday and Friday. And one thing that strikes me, and I'm not answering your question, but one thing that strikes me is how rarely teams practice these days, Brian. They do. I know they do a lot of video work. They do a lot of classroom work. There are a lot of meetings on the road, on off days, but it just seems to me like it is the emphasis on practice versus recovery has shifted, and scientifically maybe it's the right thing to do, but I think it's harder for teams to shore up weaknesses when they don't practice. What do you think, Brian?
Well, I think it's hard to mimic game intensity, and we were talking about beforehand about manufacturing some sort of emotions in certain games, and Ottawa was a great example of that, going up there against a team that's not very good in that building, that's not very exciting, and manufacturing it. Well, in practice, it's hard for a coach to use up all his bullets in the chamber, so to speak, to motivate guys to practice a certain level of intensity where you really do get better and learn and find yourself in these situations. And coupled with the fact that the way guys train, they take a week off when the season ends and go back to it. Mm-hmm. And as I got older, it was a week, maybe it was 3 days, maybe whatever. You're back in the gym just working out and doing stuff. Guys start skating earlier. They skate harder earlier in the summer. And then they come to camp and it's 3 days and then you're in exhibition games. So the conditioning and all that stuff, now they need recovery. And I guess it is the science with mental reps, but it's almost like working on the power play in practice. You do it all the time. And if you do it long enough, I guess coaches think maybe quantity over quality in that situation, because if you watch closely on a power play in practice, the point man gets it, has a clear lane to shoot a one-timer, and he takes a little bit off.
Yeah.
It's never exactly what it would be like in a game, because you don't want anyone to get hurt.
Right.
You certainly don't want to get hurt in the gym, and you don't want to get hurt in practice because the risk is too high in games. Coaching staff probably feels the same way. We'll give this off to them. They better come ready. And you can kind of keep your engine built up that way. You're not taking out money out of the bank, wasting it in practice. But I agree, good, hard reps, even if it's 2 or 3 over the course of a year with, 20 more practices, that's a lot more reps to kind of know where you stand, to recalibrate. And for the guys who aren't playing quite as much, maybe that's good, but that's what optionals are for. And that's what it becomes up to you as an individual to understand what you need to do to be ready.
Well, it's interesting to me, excuse me, that obviously they're 18-5-1, but sometimes their practices are more impressive than their games.
Oh my God,
You
it's
know,
crazy.
their practices are a sight to behold. You know,
I was
honestly,
gonna say
when they're
good hard
going,
reps. That's all the
Yeah, he gets them
Rangers
going
do.
early. Do they do
Yeah.
that one around in the beginning, around the circle and the passes, and then like we used to do that? We all line up in the neutral zone on the blue lines.
you know what?
Yeah.
You know what though? When we are permitted to get into the rink,
Oh yeah,
they're already
they're
moving.
past that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I don't know what they do on their, you know, what their first drill is. I don't know how they open it, because they don't, you know, they don't open the rink until they are, you know, a minute or two
Going.
into it, or yeah, they're into it. You know, the one thing I'll, you know, what I've learned about the team is that they're getting more, their depth players, I think, have performed better than maybe I would have expected. I think their bottom six in a lot of ways has been the most, well, no, the Panarin line has been their most consistent line, but the bottom six, you can count on them to contribute just about every night. And I think that was a concern, and certainly more of a concern after they lost Hedel and after now they've lost Kako. So I think that's the most pleasant surprise to me, is how their depth players have contributed, how Jonathan Quick, you know, has not, you know, has more than held up his end of the bargain. He's unbeaten, you know, he's 8-0-1, right? Or 7-0-1. So you know, I think the supporting cast has been outstanding through these first 6-7 weeks of the season.
Johnny B.
Jonny B. We were talking about him earlier on.
Hey, that's Laffy though. I told you,
Yeah.
Laffy's going to motivate guys
Yeah.
to whatever your role is going to be. You're going to be excited to be a part of it,
Yeah.
and that's showing it right now.
It is, and Larry, you actually wrote about that too, saying how, you know, you kind of think that last healthy scratch right before the final preseason game, dangling the carrot in front of Laffy, may have been the little extra motivational push that he needed, because I mean, essentially he's turned it on. He's been the guy that you hoping the Rangers were getting, and now we're finally seeing the fruits of the, you know, whatever.
Well, he's so much more. Listen, he is so much more engaged. He just is. You know, he's engaged on essentially on every shift. You see him. Whereas I know his numbers, and there's been this discussion about his 5-on-5 numbers, which are very, very good through his first 3 years. You know, certainly in comparison to the rest of the team. But he wasn't noticeable. You know, I mean, he would have a game where he'd score a couple. You'd say, wow, you know, he maybe would score another one, but he wasn't noticeable on shift after shift after shift. Now he's noticeable shift after shift after shift. And does part of that have something to do with playing with Panarin and Trocheck? Of course it does. But good players play with good players. They bring out the best in good players, right? I mean, that's why you have, you know, that's why you form lines. So I think Lafreniere's engagement, his emotional investment in the game stands out to me, you know, more than whatever his you know, his stats are. That's what stands out to me.
He was yapping. He was yapping. He was running around. Even last night, like that's what he did a couple of years ago in the playoffs when he was noticeable. And that's a big thing for me. I said that earlier. So if he's engaged and is playing like a little bit of a jerk, a little bit, you know, someone pissed in his cereal. That's what they need out of him. That's what he needs to do to be effective.
Right. And it's interesting too that they have on that line, Trocheck plays the same way.
Yep.
You know, he's a very edgy player. And so they have two guys now who are, you know, who bring a little bit extra, and they've got Panarin, who is at essentially the top of his game.
Mm-hmm.
I had a very nice conversation with Alexi before the Ottawa game, and I've been going around the locker room talking to some of the guys that have watched Alexi since he first came into the NHL. So look out for that. I think that's going to be a good one.
Ooh, that's what we in the biz call a teaser right there, folks. Stay tuned for that on the post site. Larry, we got a couple subtext questions from our Post Sports Plus subscribers that we wanted to get your opinion on, and I'm sure we'll hear from Brian and Mollie on these as well too. This one was saved specifically for you, Larry. Do you think a reunion with Vladimir Tarasenko is likely? That comes from Raphael Leibowitz and Paul Gifford. Is there a reunion in the
Do I think
cards?
it's likely? No. I think this fixation with reunions, let's bring Patrick, Patrick Kane has to come back. Oh, Tarasenko. Listen, Tyler Mott might be available at the trade deadline. Let's bring him back again. And I don't know. Listen, Tarasenko, I thought was a pretty good fit last year. And I thought as the team went down the stretch, they were trying to figure out how to get the most out of Kane. And so Kane started to get a lot more minutes, and Tarasenko's minutes dropped. And I don't think it was a particularly happy end for Tarasenko. Listen, he loved the organization, and he would have re-upped if it had been possible. But his ending wasn't any happier really than Kane's, and I just don't know that I want to go back to last spring. Honestly, I don't think there are very many good memories out of last year, and they had a pretty decent season, but I don't think they're. I think last year is something that left a bad taste in everybody's mouth the way it ended. It may have obviously it got a coach fired. So Vlad Tarasenko is a good player. If he's there and the Rangers are looking for a right wing, he can fit. He can play with Zibanejad. But my first instinct is not to try and run it back from last spring. That doesn't excite me, honestly.
Does that excite you, Bart, at all?
What I mean, he's a good player. There was too many good players almost, or something. It just didn't sort itself out the way. I didn't get it last year. I didn't get it, but just getting one of them, maybe it works better. Like Larry said, and then they got Kane and Tarasenko. I was like, well, what are they going to do now? They play 13 forward. Like, how are they going to? It just, I don't know. I didn't. It was interesting.
The power play rotation became chaotic. They were always they were trying to be fair to all of these players.
Be fair to the ones that got you there.
They actually, at one point they actually took Mika off the first unit. It was because they were trying to well, how can we get Kane more involved? How can we get Kane more involved? And the fact is that, again, I think it was everybody's best intentions, but Patrick Kane gave what he had to give. I mean, he's physically damaged when he was playing last year, and so again, I just and I know Tarasenko's a good player, and he solidified their top six in the month or so he was arranged for Kane, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if they wind up with Tarasenko, I'm okay with it. But it's again, I'd like something new. I would. I think that if they're going to go out and have to fill that right wing hole for the third straight year, people have been talking about, let's bring Vetrano back, and who has another year on his deal at 3.5, which doesn't make
good value.
But it's
good value though.
This fondness for these guys, and Vetrano played well, but
it's
nostalgic,
not like, Larry.
What's
nostalgic.
That?
It's nostalgic.
It's nostalgic.
Hey, I love Frankie V.
He's been great too this season,
and he's been awesome. And like their penalty kill with him and Henrique is like dangerous. Every time I watch them, they have 2-on-1s and they should score. They've been awesome.
Well, you mentioned Henrique. Not knowing the future of Philip Hedl, and I believe Henrique is on the final year of his deal, right? I'm pretty sure.
5.8.
He would be a guy I would look at if they're looking for a center. If Hedl is not able to come back, or if there's an issue with Hedl down the line,
well,
that's somebody I'd be interested in.
As if he scored an over against the Devils. Imagine if he scored no versus the Devils. It'd be fun to think about. to win.
He scored
we
in
got him.
overtime against the Devils. Yeah.
Look, here's my quick thing on it though. Like, you got to be careful, especially with a team that's rolling so well, that has worked so hard to get there, and saying, "Great job, guys. Now you go rest, sit in the back seat because this shiny new toy we're going to bring in and we're going to force feed him minutes and power play time."
Right.
Because even though we're at the top of the league, this guy we think is better than you. And
it
could, you got to be careful not to fracture the room and fracture an ego, which happens. We all have them as players. The guys seem to be really a really tight group, which is really hard to do. It's harder than people think. And which is why, like, I love talking about my old teams, because I was so lucky to have so many that were so tight. You can't fake it, and it's hard to get. So you don't want to ruffle feathers.
I understand that. But I also think you and again, let's say, this is speculation that Philip Hedl is not coming back as Philip Hedl. And at the deadline, they're going to be looking for somebody. I'm not talking about
totally
in 2 or 3 weeks or, in a month. But you also have to I do think you have to factor chemistry, but you also have to take a look and say, do we think we can win 16 playoff games if Nick Bonino is our third line center?
Yeah.
If we're, again, I think there's a balance there. And
I agree. Let me clarify. Like, you want to give the guys every opportunity.
Yeah.
And at the risk of that, like, so that's the balance, and that's that's kind of the risk. But totally, I mean, there's playoff years where I'm like, who are we getting? Because we need one more piece.
Right.
And everyone understands that. So it's, Drew will read the room. He'll do what he thinks best. But I always worry about that.
What did you make of the deal when they got St. Louis? Did you think you needed him? I mean, and I know there was contract stuff going on with Cali.
That's what made sense to us.
That there was contract stuff going on with him, but did you think? And there was a perception then that the Rangers needed a scoring winger. They needed a scoring winger. But did you think that you needed that?
I think it was how it was going down in the months leading up to it with Cali. Getting somebody was going to happen. If it was going to happen, I didn't really think Cali was going to get traded.
Yeah.
But then when it was him, it was like, well, we worked so hard to get goals. Like, our leading scorer was Zuccarello with 61 points on a first place team or whatever. We were not a first place team, but second half of the year, we were lighting it up.
Yeah.
And on a cup final team, we didn't score. And then we got Marty, who did not score until the playoffs.
Right.
That's just because of the guy. He wanted to come in, play well, but not ruffle any feathers. Right. And it was at that point where, like, we already got you. We lost our captain. Now you're the guy. You have to take over. And he started to, but we knew that was going to help us. And just being around him was exciting for us. It took the sting away from losing Cali just a little bit, because that really did, like, that locker room was like a funeral parlor when we heard that he was getting dealt.
Yeah.
I can imagine. I will say that I do think that, to your point, Brian, about, room chemistry and things like that, I 100% think that's a factor to be considered. And I do think that Chris Drury has taken that into consideration the last couple of seasons. If you look at the guys that he's brought in, Andrew Kopp, best friends with Jacob Trouba in college, a lot of the guys, Patrick Kane did have a connection with Artemi Panarin. It wasn't like total strangers coming in. There were connections. So I do tip my cap to Chris Drury. I do feel like that's and I feel like because he's a former player, he sees that too, for sure.
100%. Even Frankie played with Trouba program too.
Yep.
When they brought him in.
We're not trying
all of them.
Right. We're not trying to rock the boat here. We're not trying to, steer the ship off. We're looking good, essentially. So we'll keep things going that way. And of course, we'll keep looking forward to the future on the next episode of the podcast. Larry, appreciate you coming on today. We'll talk to you next week. All right.
Sure thing.
And that'll put a bow on episode 135 of Up in the Blue Seats, our Rangers podcast from the New York Post. But as always, we've got to dish out some stars before we get out of here. Brian, who's your number one star of the week?
I got Gustafsson, and I know he didn't play a whole bunch last game. I just like what he did when he stepped in after the hit and got in a fight. I think that is showing, his coaches and his teammates that I know Fox is back and my role will change back to where it was a little bit. But I am fully invested in this team. And I love things like that. I love little moments like that where guys are fully invested and they're showing you that I'll step in here and risk injury to do what's right.
That's, like you said, glue guys. That's
Yeah,
a very important glue guy for his Ranger team. My number 2 star is going to go to Artemi Panarin. Had the Hattie the other night at the Garden. It wasn't like the hat trick that was scored on Steve Valiquette, as we spoke about in the last episode, on Pittsburgh Penguins hat night, where there were 10,000 hats on the ice. But kudos to you Ranger fans that did sacrifice your $35, $40, $50 new era cap and threw it on the ice to celebrate the bread man. He's been off to a scorching start this year, and obviously a Hart Trophy candidate in the locker room. I'm gonna go 3rd star. And you know what, Brian? I'm gonna throw us out there. I'm gonna go. It's Barclay Goodrow's tooth. He lost it last night in Ottawa. There's a great JPEG of it if you want to see it on the New York Post website. You ever lose any teeth out there on the ice like that, Brian? Or I mean, I'm sure you've had something go wrong for you.
Yeah, a few of them broke in half with cross checks and high sticks and whatnot. It's poor guy's going to be in the chair for a long time today. He'll be in the dentist chair for hours. That's not fun.
Like I said before, you guys are you hockey players crazy, professional, amateur.
It's the way she goes.
As the way she goes. Well, we're gonna go now. You can catch up on all episodes of the podcast by subscribing to Up in the Blue Seats on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or if you get your podcasts. If you're watching us right now on the New York Post Sports YouTube page, give us a thumbs up below. Comment below. Did you ever lose a tooth like that, like Barkley did, or any sort of way? Hopefully not. That just sounds painful. You can follow us on Twitter at Mollie Walker, 2 E's, 2 R's, Bri Browse 22, and myself, Andrew Harts, no E. For Brian Boyle, Larry Brooks, Mollie Walker, I'm Andrew Harts. We're back next week for another episode of the podcast. Thanks for listening. As always, Up in the Blue Seats. Have a happy and healthy day, week, holiday season. We'll talk to you then. Later.